Hi guys, before we left school, we talked a lot about how that there was fighting between the king and the pope. And so that's continuing to happen. And you also have the Catholic Church has gained a lot of power. And so now that we're talking about a period of time called the Reformation. So the Reformation is a time when people that are inside the Catholic Church start questioning some of the different things that were happening in the church. Remember now that if you are a Christian, the only church you're part of is the Catholic Church, nothing else exists. So Martin Luther was a German monk who questioned the Catholic Church. At first, he only wanted to reform the church. This is why the events are called the Reformation. So this is Martin Luther. Martin Luther is not Martin Luther King Jr., who we have the day off in January, the civil rights activist. So that's always in class, the very first thing people ask me. So he's a German monk from a little town called Wittenberg in Germany. So problems in the Catholic Church. So what necessarily was going on in the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church had grown wealthy by collecting taxes. So there was a lot of tax money that was being collected throughout the different cities, Germany and in Italy. Some bishops built palaces and provided jobs for relatives. So instead of providing jobs for the person that was most fit, kind of like when we were talking about China and the civil service exam, how that you'd pick the best person for the job, not necessarily a friend. Well, they were just giving jobs to people that they were related to. The church also began to sell indulgences, which is a certificate issued by the church. This granted a pardon for a person's sins. So it started out with you would go and in the Catholic Church, you would go to confession and you would explain, I took money from the cookie jar. And then there would be, you could buy this indulgence, which would be a forgiveness for your sins. But it started to get a little out of control when people could buy these indulgences for somebody that had died in their family. So let's say my grandma died and I want to make sure that she's in heaven. Well, they would sell me an indulgence to make sure that that happened. So it really got out of control and the church was making hand over fist in money. A lot when we talk about all of the church, the art that you guys saw last week in the Vatican, all of that artwork was money that the Catholic Church paid for Renaissance artists to be able to put in the Vatican. And you can see, there was so much art, 4 miles of art. And that was just in one building. That's not counting other places that the Catholic Church built different palaces and put different artwork in. So people are starting to question all of the money that's being brought in by the Catholic Church. John Wycliffe believed that people should recognize Jesus as the head of the church, not the Pope. So there's another movement that why is Jesus not the center of the church? Why is the Pope, a human being, not Jesus, being considered so important? So these are people that are starting to speak up. He believed that all religious truth came from the Bible, and he also believed that the Bible should be translated from Latin to English, in particular so that people could actually understand what the language was. I don't know which order you're watching things in. If you watch the video about the Reformation first, it already talked about how Latin was only for the educated people, the really smart people. It wasn't for the common person that is plowing the ground outside or selling shoes at the marketplace. Latin was for people that had gone to university, so obviously more men than women wouldn't be able to speak Latin because, girls didn't go to school. Disastrous Erasmus was a humanist learning and Bible study were the best ways to improve the church. He believed that being able to question things, you shouldn't believe something just because someone tells you it's so. And that's actually a good point for us today, is that it's always important when people tell you things to where does it say that in the Bible? Ask for proof, because if someone's telling you the truth, there's going to be biblical standing to back it up. And so he wanted the Bible to be in a language that people could understand, so that people could actually read and find the scripture for themselves. Erasmus believed that people should use their reason to become better Christians. It was more important for people to be good in their everyday lives than to just go to church on Sunday. By improving themselves, they would improve church and society. And that's actually one of the questions I have on your sheet, is what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to be to not just be good just on Sunday? For me growing up, I would see kids in my youth group that I knew were at parties doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing on a Saturday night, but then they would have their hands up worshiping God on Sunday. And it was continuously, it was like every week. And so it bothered me, and I would tell my parents that I didn't want to go to youth group because they were a bunch of hypocrites. And so well, we're not all sinless. It is something to where if you're going to be a Christian, you're not just a Christian at school, you're not just a Christian on Sundays. You need to be a Christian in every walk of your life. We're all going to slip and make mistakes, but it's really important that we strive to be like Jesus and be a Christian in every part of our life. By improving themselves, they would improve the church and society. So Erasmus believed that if you worked really hard to improve the person you are, then the church and the society around would be better. You got to think a lot about what's going on right now with COVID, is that you have people going out into the community, you have people that are working in food kitchens. You have people that are assisting nurses. You have people that are trying to do acts of kindness for grocery store workers. Is that as you strive to do the right thing, it's going to bleed out to your society and make your society of people that care more about everybody than about themselves. Luther's Reformation. Luther got to the point as he's starting to look around him that he was worried about his own soul. He visited Rome and he saw how disrespectful the priests were. He asked himself, how could these corrupt priests lead people to Christ? When the church started selling indulgences to restore St. Peter's Basilica, that is the main chapel in the Vatican where we saw, you guys did a video last week where Michelangelo's artwork is on the ceiling. Luther knew he had to do something. He just could not. It's one of those things when you know somebody's doing something wrong and you can't just sit back anymore. So he finally said, you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm going to go and I'm going to put 95 reasons why I oppose the church. So he came up with these 95 theses. And this is like somebody having a problem. Like, let's say if somebody has a problem with Desert Christian and they go in the very front door of the school and put up the 95 reasons I have a problem with the school. And so that every single person that walks in the door sees what those problems are. And that's what he did. Back then, that was a place where everybody would see. It was like a community board. And so it spread around the town. However, without the inventing of the printing press, nobody else would have ever found this out. But because of the printing press, somebody took those 95 theses, put it through the press, put them in your little horse and buggy and went to different towns, and it spread and it spread and it spread. Just like the internet today and social media. That back, when I was a kid, there would be no way people would know anything about what's going on with somebody's life. And now you put one thing up and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. So Luther had all of these beliefs that the church was doing wrong. But what exactly were Luther's beliefs? Luther's beliefs turned into the Protestant church, and his church is part of Lutheranism today. Luther's believe that only way to heaven is through Jesus. So the only way to get there is through Jesus. You don't need a priest. You don't need the Pope. That you ask Jesus into your heart. That's all that he asks from us. The only source of truth is the Bible. The Bible is our guidebook. It has everything we need to know. It tells us how to act. It tells us what to expect. It tells us to trust in Jesus. It absolutely is our life book. We don't need anybody. We don't need any other source of truth telling us. And so it was really important to him that people could actually read the Bible. Christians should confess their sins directly to God, not through a priest. That we can just pray. We don't need somebody in between. The church ends up excommunicating Luther. Remember, we talked about excommunication when we talked about Henry and Gregory. Remember that Henry was excommunicated and he went to Gregory's winter house and begged him to please, please, please forgive me. Being excommunicated means, for one, he's a monk, so he's that's like where he lives, and this is his world. But you can't get married, you can't have kids. Like, there are so many things. You can't function in society if you're not part of the church at this time. So Luther's church. Luther formed his own church called Lutheranism. Faith, not good works, bring someone to heaven. So you can't just do good things and expect that that's enough. You have to have a faith in Jesus. The Bible is the final source of all truth, and the church is made up of all believers, not just clergy. So everybody's equal in God's eyes. So recapping, the Reformation was a time when a young German monk decided to go against the really scary Roman Catholic Church and say what they were doing was wrong. And started a movement where we have Protestant churches today, all because he decided to speak up for something that he believed in. So it just shows that one person really can make a difference. And it just shows that that really the foundation of our faith needs to be through Jesus, through the Bible, and to know that we're all equal in God's eyes. So I will continue tomorrow with the next part of the chapter.